Oh hi! Welcome to a Minecraft tutorial. Something that has been requested of me many times is to give a tutorial on the Jawa Sandcrawler that I designed. I decided to take this opportunity then and to improve my old design, and so this video is going to teach you how I built it, as well as my process and decision making that went into it. The first thing that I always do is search for some reference imagery that I can refer back to throughout the building process. Something you may notice in all the references that I'm using is that the details in the Sandcrawler actually vary slightly. This is actually a good thing because it gives us some room for creative license and we can kind of experiment and change things around a little bit. Now looking at our images, it's important to select our block palette first. The Sandcrawler is made up of mostly browns and some oranges, so to improve the detail I selected a spectrum of blocks along this range. Dark oak planks, brown terracotta, brown concrete, stripped dark oak logs, stripped spruce logs, and spruce planks. While these are the blocks that I decided to use, you could easily incorporate brown concrete powder, brown wool, even brown mushroom block, or red sandstone to add additional detail and variety. Now that we have sufficient reference imagery and a suitable block palette selected, it is finally time to start working on the build itself. I'm going to begin with these sort of tank treads at the base, which I think is easily the most complicated feature of the build detail-wise. Starting with one side of the track, we'll begin by filling in the shape with our stripped spruce logs randomly rotated around. I decided to go with a bottom row of 11 blocks, 13 blocks up for the next two rows, and 15 for the top row. Of course, this could easily be adjusted slightly to suit your own needs, as long as it renders the same sort of trapezoid shape. To add some more detail and add some more shapes and motion to the build, I'm bringing in some spruce stairs and slabs and a bit of a pattern here. It's not exactly how it looks in the reference imagery, but this is what I went with and how I like to translate it into Minecraft. To finish up this side of the track, I'm going to take two rows of dark oak trapdoors and wrap them all the way around what we just did, including an overhang on the outside end of the track and taking care to include the bottom row. To add some extra detail here, we can offset some of the trapdoors, bringing a little bit of variation. Next, we need to come to the inside of the track and, leaving a single block gap, we can come in and replicate what we just built. To fix the gap between the two halves, we'll place in some stripped dark oak logs with the swirly end showing through the holes we made with our stair pattern. With one track complete, we can copy it over 3 more times, giving it a gap of 5 blocks from left to right, and 5 blocks between front and back. To finish and provide a way for the tracks to connect to the main body of the Sandcrawler, I'm placing in 3 sets of upside down stairs in this kind of 3x3 pattern on top of each track like so. With that, we can place in the floor of our main structure in dark oak planks, extending it from each far corner of our tracks. This should be a 15 by 35 block rectangle if you've been following along with the dimensions so far. Around this platform, we'll place in an outline of upside down dark oak stairs around the entire perimeter. At this point, we'll also bring in an additional row of upside down dark oak stairs in the back. On top of our perimeter of stairs, we will now add 4 rows of brown terracotta, leaving the front open and adjusting it to 3 blocks high in the back to compensate for our extra row of stairs. Now is a good time to address the underside of the Sandcrawler. The main thing of note is the sort of tube or box coming down from the middle between all of the tank treads. For this, just find the corner of each track and bring 3 blocks down from the bottom of the Sandcrawler's new floor using a mixture of dark oak and black terracotta. I then completed the circle with 3x3 block sections coming out from the corners of each side in order to make a bit of a cylinder shape. There's also some kind of shape at the rear of the Sandcrawler between the 2 tracks. It's not really clear where this extends from in any of my references, so I decided to bring it all the way from this central cylinder that we just created. Making this a 3x3 shape with a little notch in the bottom, bring it right all the way to the back, replacing the bottom 2 blocks at the end with 2 upside down dark oak stairs. Now, by cross-referencing several of our images, we can tell that there are essentially 3 distinct sections to the Sandcrawler. There's this large trapezoidal section in the middle dividing the front and the back, and that's where I want to start. Since it looks to be relatively centered on the Sandcrawler, I'll be centering it here. So by leaving a space of 8 blocks on either end, I'll start my slope shape by coming up 3 blocks on the first 2 steps, then 4 blocks on the last 2 steps. And that's our middle section, mostly figured out already. Moving to the back section, we can see from these images that this part slopes inward on the Sandcrawler, as well as there being this weird, complicated bit on the very back end that we'll have to do our best to simplify. First, we'll take 2 rows of blocks at the back and extend it slightly, before starting on the sloping side panels. The first step is 4 blocks tall and comes in from the end by a single block. The next section extends to the rear by an additional block and is 6 blocks high if you count the single block overlap here of our first section. The third and final section just follows the same pattern as the second one. Extend towards the back by a single block and overlapping by 1 block is 6 blocks high. If you've done this correctly, it will be the same height as the trapezoidal midsection of the Sandcrawler. Speaking of that, you may notice a bit of a gap has been created between the two sections. To fix this, just extend the middle section inwards to meet the rear panels. Turning our attention now to the back end, we've got to find a way to replicate our reference image in some form. First, I built a flat wall coming in 2 blocks from the edge and extending the full height of our walls. I then divided this section even further with a tall kind of cross shape extending out by 2 blocks. From here, I don't really think it matters too much what you do so long as each side is symmetrical, but feel free to pause the video here and copy exactly what I have done. The final section here in the front is probably the most difficult to replicate. Looking at our reference, we can see a triangular panel coming inwards slightly here and a second triangle coming up outwards at the top. And while it looks fairly simple in shapes, it's been actually incredibly difficult for me to bring these angles into Minecraft. So I've done my best to approximate and kind of smooth things out, and while it's definitely not exactly how it ought to be according to our images, I feel like it communicates the right sort of shape and I think it looks good. I can't really find a good way of explaining how to make this shape either, so I'll leave a series of images on the screen here with the appropriate measurements that you ought to be able to follow along with if you choose to do so. Now at the front end there is this large door that can swing downwards to make a ramp into the hull of the Sandcrawler. You're welcome to leave it closed as I've shown here, or you may open it up. If you choose to do that, make sure that the width of the door is consistent with the opening as it tapers downwards towards the end. That way it creates a feeling of continuity and it makes it more believable that this door could actually fit in the gap that's shown. If it's open, I like to add some sort of hydraulic piston, utilizing black stone or nether brick walls and some dark oak fences. That way it actually looks like it has some sort of mechanism to open and close it. Finally, to finish up the exterior structure, place in a ceiling leaving just a single block as a barrier all the way around at the top. Since the front end is higher, you'll also have to adjust the height of the ceiling slightly a few times in those areas. That's the outside structure all finished off. However, it's looking a little bit bland and boring at this stage. In order to really make this build come alive and be a little bit more immersive, we need to employ our gradient block palette that we selected at the beginning. The Sandcrawler appears to be rather old and worn, much like anything that really spends very much time on Tatooine. Rusty and oxidized sections, dirty smears, and sand or salt buildup will all drive this idea home. Let's start at the bottom. Bringing in dark oak planks, let it transition slowly in splotches into the brown terracotta. About halfway up the Sandcrawler, the brown terracotta will transition into brown concrete, also pretty splotchily. You don't want any clean lines here at all. Feel free to have small spots high and low to reinforce this gradual change. The top will then transition from brown concrete into stripped dark oak logs. Now if you want, you can stop here. It looks really good right now. This is quite enough to establish a nice worn and antiquated look. Optionally, however, you could paint in a few more highlights and lowlights. Grab some black terracotta to make these dark smears near the bottom. A few splotches of smooth red sandstone gives it a really nice rusty patina. Brown mushroom blocks also look like a nice salt and sand buildup without being too high in contrast. Place some spruce trapdoors here and there and punch out the backs behind to make it some functional windows that you can open and close. I also like to add some spruce stair blocks to create some depth and interest throughout it as well. Something I'd always recommend also is to pile up some sand in front of the tracks and make some holes behind to establish how it fits in the world's surroundings, like it is actually able to move and drove where it is in your world. Just be careful not to go too overboard with any of these. If you have too much noise in the blocks, it kind of loses the shape and becomes a little bit too chaotic and might not look as good. But there's really not much you can do to really screw it up. Have some fun with it. Follow along with your references or just make it your own. Now if you made it to the end of the video, thanks so much. I'm really glad that you enjoyed my content. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Now this has been Cold Oatmeal. I'll see you later.